Pleasure to be joined by Locked On Ravens host Kevin Ostreicher. Kevin, the NFL draft on Thursday, huge one for NFL fans across the country. We're talking Ravens. They have the 30th pick in the first round in this year's draft. We know the Ravens are used to picking late at this point. What do you see them doing in the first round of Thursday's draft?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the offensive line is the key need for the Ravens. Three starters gone in John Simpson, Kevin Zeitler, and Morgan Moses. So for Baltimore, it actually works out pretty well because this offensive tackle class is one of the best in recent seasons. So they're going to be able to hopefully have the pick of a couple of really talented players there and a lot of other offensive tackle needy teams. But also for the Ravens, it's not just on the offensive line. Wide receiver is another need for them. You could look back to their previous draft history. You could say, well, they drafted Marquise Brown in 2019, Rashad Bateman 2021, Zay Flowers 2023. But obviously, Marquise Brown hasn't been there for a couple of years now. The jury's still out a little bit on Bateman. Really, only Flowers is looking like the sure thing, but it's only been one season. So the Ravens, they will have offensive options, but this is you talk about Ravens. What everybody thinks first about Ravens is defense. The Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, all those guys. So I wouldn't be shocked if Baltimore went that route either. Maybe a cornerback. The Ravens, they have good ones right now. Marlon Humphrey, Brandon Stevens, but Stevens is not under contract past this upcoming year. Marlon Humphrey's contract is going to be more of a conversation point as the seasons go on. So the Ravens love to have three corner rotations, especially on the outside. I wouldn't be shocked if Baltimore went there either.
And you mentioned that defense with the Ravens. Like you said, everybody is very accustomed to what they've done on the defensive side of the ball, especially this past year. Obviously, we know Mike McDonald has moved on. Are there any guys, and maybe the day two or day three range, that you could see come in and potentially, get drafted by the Ravens on that defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, there are a couple of guys I really like. Personally, in the cornerback room, if they decide to go maybe offense with their first pick, I think corner in the second or maybe third round would be a really sweet spot. One of the guys I think would really fit what this Ravens team does on defense is Kyrie Jackson out of Oregon, a corner that has a lot of physical tools, a willing tackler, and also really sticky in covers. And that's kind of where Baltimore has almost shifted their identity. The Ravens, especially last offseason, they took out a lot of these guys from their defense that were more finesse players. Marcus Peters, didn't really have the biggest frame, but he was known, the ball hawking corner. They replaced him with a guy in Rock Ya-Sin who didn't really play, but he's a physical style corner. Justin Houston, a third down pass rushing specialist, and obviously a guy who's gotten to the quarterback millions of times, it feels like, during his career. They move on from him, bring in Jadeveon Clowney, super physical. This Ravens defense loves physicality, and I think that Kyrie Jackson could be that guy. Renardo Green, another one of those guys from Florida State who could be an option. Cam Hart, even Kalen King in that corner room. In the edge department, it's interesting. Guys like Austin Booker potentially could be a third-round target for them. Or even if you want to talk about this team being a best player available team, maybe they look at defensive line where it's not a need for them right now, but there are a couple of pieces on there right now that aren't necessarily long-term guys. So maybe defensive line. Those positions, though, were the ones I can see day two. And then when you get to day three, so I think special teams is going to be the name of the game for a lot of people. So maybe an inside linebacker, safety. Also, they lost Geno Stone. So plenty of needs for this Ravens team. They have 9 picks. We're going to see how they use them.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of mentioned the 9 picks. That kind of led me to my next question. Do you see any trade up or trade back options for the Ravens? We know, a lot of times some teams at the end of the first round, maybe let a team come back up and, they accumulate, a couple second round picks if they have grades similarly for some players. Any trade options at all for the Ravens that you think?
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. In terms of trading up, it would have to be a player almost, and I'll relate it back to the Ravens, a Kyle Hamilton type of fall, where he fell to 14. He was a consensus top 5, top 7 guy for a lot of people. And then once you started getting to the 10 range for Kyle Hamilton, I think a lot of people in Baltimore were saying, well, are the Ravens going to move up? Are they going to move up? And luckily they fell to him. But if there's that similar type of fall for an offensive lineman or maybe even one of the top wide receivers, I think Baltimore could certainly consider it. The one I think is more likely, though, is the trade back. I think Eric DeCosta, especially in a post-rookie contract Lamar Jackson world, it's ever so important to hit on your draft picks and obviously hit on the veteran signings. Eric DeCosta did a great job last offseason of doing that, but those 9 picks could maybe turn into 10 or 11. And it's interesting because I could potentially see a team depending. We all know Caleb Williams, that's the number one guy, and then Jaden Daniels and all those players. But you talk about maybe where does a Bo Nix fall? Where does a Michael Penix Jr. fall? Those are the ones that are interesting because if there's a team that really likes one of those guys and they're still available in that 28, 29, 31, that area, they could trade up with the Ravens for that fifth year option, which is still very valuable, almost like what the Ravens did with Lamar Jackson back in 2018 when they traded with the Eagles to get that 32nd overall pick. That could maybe have the Ravens getting a second round pick, multiple second round picks, maybe 2025 draft capital. I could see Baltimore trading back, especially if they're only moving back a few spots and getting a bunch of value out of that pick.
Absolutely. You mentioned, Eric DaCosta obviously has done a great job there since he's taken over for Ozzie in terms of, evaluating talent and getting good players in there. In terms of that, is there one or two players maybe that you think would be a perfect fit for the Ravens, whether it's offensively or defensively, a guy that you really, could see coming in and making an immediate impact, or a guy that you may have heard has visited, maybe at the combine or with the top 30 visit, a guy or two that they seem really interested in?
Yeah, there are a couple of guys. I think one of them is more of a dream scenario. The other guy I think will probably be there. So the first one is Troy Fautanu from Washington, the offensive lineman. Super versatile player, really physical. He is exactly the player that I think the Ravens would be enamored with if he fell to 30. Now the problem is he's not going to fall to 30. So it would have to be a trade up in that case. Again, a lot of really talented offensive linemen. There are arguments that Fautanu could be the second offensive lineman taken in this class, only behind obviously Joe Alt, who's going to be the first. So I think that for the Ravens, if maybe there is a Kyle Hamilton type fall there, I'm not sure what it would be for. He's a pretty much check all the boxes prospect. But if that happens, the Ravens have spent some time with him. I think there's a lot of interest, but I could honestly see him maybe even going to an AFC North rival like the Bengals, who are also looking for some offensive line help. Now, the one that I think is a lot more realistic is in the wide receiver department. That's Xavier Legette out of South Carolina. I think he started this draft process maybe more so as a late second round pick, but as this has gone on, honestly, I think he's going to take it in the first round. I could see a team like Buffalo really wanting him, Baltimore, Kansas City, more so those back end of the draft teams. And it feels like he fits exactly what Baltimore needs. The Ravens have Zay Flowers. They have Rashad Bateman, Nelson Aguilar, Deontay Hardy. They just brought in two, Tylan Wallace. Those are guys who aren't necessarily, they don't have the biggest frames. They're not the contested catch jump ball receivers. Eric DaCosta has gone on record saying he would love to build a track team, but I think you got to have a jumper on there as well, someone who can come down with those. Now, you can argue Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely as your tight ends can be those players, but I think it would help in the wide receiver department too. So Legette is somebody, has the big body, has some speed to him, contested catch guy too. I think a lot of people are kind of pinning him right at the beginning of that second round, almost like T. Higgins range, Michael Pittman Jr. range. But I could see him going late 20s, early 30s, right at the end of that first round. I think Baltimore could be a landing spot for him.
Absolutely. And then kind of back on the defensive side of the ball, obviously, they lost Patrick Queen, Geno Stone. Are there any, prospects that may be able to come in and kind of fill those gaps in? We know linebacker, not a super premium position on the defensive side, and you can make the argument for safety as well. But, like you said, Eric DaCosta, this is where he makes his magic, finding those diamonds in the roughs. Any prospects, who could potentially come in and kind of fill those spots on a rookie deal?
Yeah, definitely. I think realistically, they're not going to be in the conversation for one of the top guys. I think people have identified the top two needs for the Ravens, talked about a bit earlier, as corner and edge. So they're not going to be in Dallas Turner range. You're not going to be in Kenyon Mitchell or Terrion Arnold range. But I do think two prospects that could maybe be there at 30. Kool-Aid McKinstry from Alabama, the corner, being the first one. A lot of physical tools from him. And I think a lot of people would be comfortable if he was the guy taken number 30 in the first round. For the edge position, Chop Robinson out of Penn State would be the other one. Obviously, the Ravens already have a Penn State pass rusher in Odafe Owe, but Chop Robinson, a local guy, and being from the area would be a really cool feel-good story. He almost lines up a little bit similarly with Owe and almost the college story. Not a ton of production, but tested out of the water in terms of what he did at the combine, and I think has increased his stock a ton. I don't expect those two to be there at 30, but I think if we maybe see a run on wide receivers, a run on offensive linemen, maybe an early quarterback run, those guys continue to get pushed down the board. The Ravens could easily have maybe one, if not both of those guys, and they would have to weigh it against, again, the offensive needs like offensive line and wide receiver.
I think, like you said, there's a bunch of different ways that the Ravens can go. For you, in your perspective, what does obviously there's no perfect draft, but for you, if you were Eric DaCosta, what does a draft that the Ravens fans and the Ravens faithful can feel good about if they come out with a couple of positions? What do you think?
Yeah, I think just balanced overall, where the Ravens have lost a massive amount of talent. You mentioned some of the guys they've lost already, and they had about 20 free agents, 20 plus before free agency started. They're down to only three now, but a lot of those guys ended up out different teams. So they have a lot of holes to fill. I think multiple offensive linemen, especially early, is the way that Ravens fans would feel comfortable, whether that's a first round offensive lineman and a third round offensive lineman. Maybe you spend both your day two picks on offensive line. Getting a wide receiver and also is important. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. I think an NFL ready, big bodied wide receiver would have a lot of fans feeling good. And then just filling out some of the other holes on defense, talk about corner and edge. I also think, and Eric DaCosta has said this, that he's interested in adding a running back. Now, I wouldn't expect that to be anywhere in day one or day two. I'd honestly think day three is kind of the start of that, but there are a lot of good running back prospects. I mean, Braylon Allen, Blake Corum, Jalen Wright, there are plenty that can make an impact, even if they wanted to go a little bit later in this draft with Kamani Vidal, Isaac Guerrero. So I would expect Baltimore to add a later round running back. Backup quarterback is also a position. Maybe a Joe Milton would fill their needs, but you're not going to take five offensive linemen. You're not going to take five wide receivers. Obviously, there's going to be some balance in what the Ravens do, but they're a best player available team. I would not be shocked if they were to take a defensive lineman, an inside linebacker. The only two positions I'd be pretty shocked is obviously a starting quarterback, which they have no need for in Lamar Jackson, but a tight end would be the only one, really. They're three deep there, don't need that. But I'd say multiple offensive linemen, wide receiver, corner, edge. I think people would be feeling comfortable.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, Kevin. Obviously, we know the Ravens. One thing they will do, they will hit on a late round prospect who will turn out to be a star. So, Kevin, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much.
Ready.